Imagine waking up one morning, walking out your front door, and seeing a bright orange eviction notice slapped on your garage, claiming that your own home, the one you paid for with your hard-earned money, wasn't really yours to live in. That was the day my nightmare began. The people behind it? Not the bank, not the city, but the HOA, Homeowners Association. They wanted me gone. But little did they know, their plan to kick me out would backfire so hard that, in the end, it wouldn't be me who disappeared. It would be them. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought the HOA was just a harmless little committee. A few neighbors in polos and khakis making sure lawns stayed neat, trash bins didn't stay out too long, and houses kept a uniform look. Nothing serious. I paid my monthly fees without complaint. I waved and smiled at the board members when I saw them at the mailbox, and I minded my own business. Honestly, I thought the HOA was just background noise, something you hardly noticed. But then, one tiny disagreement lit the fuse that would eventually explode into the fight of my life. It all began with something so ordinary. I built a shed in my backyard. Nothing fancy, nothing over the top. Just a small wooden structure where I could store my tools, lawnmower, and gardening supplies. To me, it was practical. To my family, it meant the garage wasn't cluttered anymore. To the HOA, apparently, it was an act of rebellion. A few weeks after finishing the shed, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA. The tone of the letter was cold and condescending, like I was a child being scolded. It said my shed wasn't approved, and I needed to tear it down immediately. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, rereading that line over and over. Approved? By who? When I moved in, I got a thick packet of rules and regulations, and I went through it carefully. There was nothing about sheds being banned. So, I decided to be polite about it. I wrote back, explaining that I had reviewed the HOA's rules and didn't see any mention of sheds being prohibited. I even included page numbers, hoping they'd see reason. I thought that would be the end of it. But instead of backing off, the HOA doubled down. That's when the harassment began. Suddenly, I started receiving fines in the mail. At first, it was $100, then $200, then another one, and another one. Each letter was more aggressive than the last. They said my shed violated the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. Aesthetic integrity, whatever that even means. It felt less like they cared about the community, and more like they were testing how much they could bully me. I ignored the fines at first, because I knew I hadn't broken any rules. But ignoring them turned out to be a mistake, because when I didn't pay, the HOA claimed I was in default. They tacked on interest, late fees, and penalties until suddenly, according to their math, I owed thousands of dollars. And then came the bombshell, the moment everything changed. I opened my mailbox one morning and saw an official-looking envelope. Inside was paperwork that made my stomach drop. The HOA had filed to foreclose on my home. Yes, you heard that right. Not the bank, not the government, but a group of neighbors with clipboards and power trips were trying to take away the house I had poured my savings into. My safe place, my investment, my family's home. They wanted it gone. All because of a shed. I was terrified at first. Who wouldn't be? I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I could lose. My home wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was years of hard work, savings, and sacrifices. It was where I planned to raise my family, where I thought I was safe. The idea that a group of power-hungry neighbors could rip that away from me made my stomach twist. But after the fear settled in, something else began to rise up inside me, anger. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about a shed. This was about control, intimidation, and greed. And if they wanted a fight, then fine. I was going to give them one. The very first step I took was hiring a lawyer. Honestly, it was the best money I have ever spent. I remember walking into his office with a stack of HOA letters, fines, and threats. He flipped through them, shaking his head, and then he actually laughed. That laugh gave me more relief than I can describe. He told me right away that the HOA board was acting far outside of their legal authority. They weren't following their own bylaws. They were inventing rules as they went along, fining people without legal standing, and in some cases, funneling money into vague administrative costs that no one could explain. In plain English, They were abusing their power. That gave me hope. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. So, I started reaching out to my neighbors. At first, it wasn't easy. A lot of them were hesitant to talk, like they were scared of being overheard. That told me everything I needed to know. This HOA had been bullying people for years. Slowly, the story started trickling in. One neighbor had been fined hundreds of dollars because the curtains in their living room were the wrong shade of beige. Another was cited because their kids left their bikes out in the driveway for more than a day. Someone else told me they got written up for parking their own car in their own driveway too long, because apparently it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. It was ridiculous. The more I listened, the angrier we all became. And when people realized they weren't alone, that there were dozens of us being treated unfairly, something shifted. Fear turned into courage. We decided to hold a community meeting, but this time without the board members. That night, we packed into a neighbor's garage, and for the first time, people spoke freely. Story after story poured out. Families who had been harassed, threatened, and drained financially by the very people who were supposed to be looking out for our neighborhood. And in that moment, it became crystal clear. It wasn't just me versus the HOA. It was all of us. With my lawyer's guidance and the growing support of my neighbors, we decided to go straight to the root of the problem, the HOA's finances. By law, the board is required to keep detailed records of where the money goes and make them available for review if homeowners request it. And let me tell you, the moment we made that request, their faces told me everything. They stalled, they delayed, and they made excuses. That alone raised red flags. But eventually, with legal pressure, they had no choice but to hand over the documents. That night, a small group of us gathered in my living room with my lawyer, stacks of papers spread out across the coffee table. As we flipped through the records, our jaws hit the floor. Tens of thousands of dollars were unaccounted for. Dues that were supposed to go toward maintaining the neighborhood, fixing sidewalks, landscaping, keeping up the community pool, had simply vanished. What little spending was documented was even worse. HOA funds were being used for fancy steakhouse dinners, business retreats that were really vacations, and even personal expenses like remodeling one board member's kitchen. Can you imagine? While families were being fined for curtains and kids' bikes, the so-called leaders were treating themselves to luxury at our expense. It was infuriating, but also empowering, because now we had hard evidence. This wasn't just a case of an annoying HOA being power-hungry. This was outright fraud. Once we had that proof, it was game over. The next step was calling for a special election to remove the corrupt board. Legally, homeowners had the right to do it, and with the evidence we gathered, they couldn't stop us. Of course, they tried, sending out threatening letters, insisting the vote wasn't valid, even trying to scare people into staying home. But this time, the neighborhood wasn't backing down. When the day of the vote finally arrived, the turnout was unlike anything we'd ever seen. Normally, HOA meetings had maybe a dozen bored people half listening. But this time, nearly every single homeowner showed up. People brought their spouses, their kids, even lawn chairs because there weren't enough seats. The energy in the room was electric, and when the votes were counted, the result couldn't have been clearer. It wasn't close. Not even a little. The board was voted out unanimously. Just like that, the people who had terrorized the neighborhood for years were stripped of their power. But the story didn't end there. The evidence of theft and fraud was so overwhelming that it didn't just stop with their removal. Criminal charges were filed. The same people who had once threatened to throw me out of my home were suddenly the ones packing their bags. Not for a vacation this time, but for court. In the end, I didn't lose my home. The foreclosure threat, the harassment, the endless fines, they all crumbled once the truth came out. And what started as a fight to save my own house turned into something much bigger. Our entire neighborhood gained something far more valuable than money or property. We gained freedom. Freedom from a corrupt, power-hungry HOA that had been weighing on everyone's shoulders for years. Once the old board was removed, we came together to elect a brand new one. This time, the people stepping up weren't bullies or control freaks. They were honest, hard-working neighbors, the kind of folks who actually cared about building a community where families felt safe and welcome. People who wanted the neighborhood to thrive, not their own egos or bank accounts. Almost immediately, things started to change. The insane, petty fines stopped. The threatening letters stopped. For the first time in years, people could paint their doors the color they liked, park in their own driveways without fear, and let their kids ride bikes without worrying about being slapped with a violation. The neighborhood began to feel alive again. You could see it in the way people smiled, the way they waved, the way they actually wanted to attend meetings instead of dreading them. It was like a heavy cloud had finally lifted. And as for me, I still have my shed. Every time I walk into it, whether it's to grab a tool, mow the lawn, or just step inside for a moment, I smile. Because at this point, it's not just a shed. It's a symbol that no one, not even a self-appointed group with fancy titles and a stamp of authority, can push ordinary people around when those people decide to stand together. That shed reminds me of every neighbor who raised their voice when they were scared. It reminds me of the long nights spent combing through financial records. It reminds me of the vote where the entire neighborhood stood as one and said, "Enough." And most importantly, it reminds me that the little guy can win. So if you ever find yourself in a battle like this, don't give up. Don't let fear silence you. Remember my story, and remember this. With knowledge, persistence, and unity, you are stronger than you realize. You don't have to roll over and take it. You don't have to let greed and intimidation win. Because sometimes, the very people who try to tear you down, the ones who think they hold all the power, end up being the ones who disappear forever.